Hi, children. Well, today we are going to study together the chapter Nelson Mandela, A Long Walk to Freedom. Children, before I start, I would just like to introduce you about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a socialist, activist, politician, and philanthropist who became South Africa's first black president from 1994 to 1999. After becoming involved in the anti apartheid movement in his 20s, Mandela joined the African National Congress in 1942. For 20 years, he directed a campaign of peaceful, non-violent defiance against the South African government and its racist policies. Well, children, the chapter Nelson Mandela, it is an autobiography. Now, I hope all of you know what is the difference between a biography and an autobiography. Biography is the life history of an individual written by someone else, whereas the autobiography is an expression of a person's life written by self. Now, children, you see the chapter Nelson Mandela is a very important chapter as we have lot many things to learn from this. The life of Nelson Mandela, children, serves as a shining example that one person can change the world. Well, there is a saying that we are mango people, we are common mass. But today, through this chapter, you will learn that heroes are not a thing of fiction or of the past, but that heroes are part of our contemporary world and that all our lives are better for that. Children, as the chapter we will proceed with, I hope and expect that you would enjoy taking this long walk with Nelson Mandela and finding new ways to think about the world in which we live. Now, I would like to start with a very well said quote. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed. Similarities now you will draw when I talk about Nelson Mandela. We can draw similarities, we can infer the situation with our country India. The same happened where Gandhiji and many other leaders they tried their level best to make the country free. Now, children, you see that Nelson Mandela, how it is going to inspire the readers apart from understanding the chapter, as you can see reflecting on the screen, that the theme, you must note that theme very appropriately. Now, the chapter deals with the protagonist, Nelson Mandela, first black president of South Africa, and the next very important character, Zenani. Now, this chapter, deals with, or it will just provide you a glimpse of the early life of Nelson Mandela, his education, 30 years in prison, and the pains he had suffered in his young age. The chapter will also recount his fight for the freedom for his own people who were tortured by the whites. At the same time, children, in this chapter, it will give two contradictory pictures of his own country, one in which the blacks were tortured and suffered quietly, and second, the blacks will be free to live the life of their own. Now, you need to pay more attention when I talk about Nelson Mandela, a great hero who gave freedom to the blacks in South Africa. Coming down to the historical part, he was born on 18 July 1918 and as a part of South Africa's Cape Province, he fought against the apartheid regime of South Africa, which believed in racialism. At the same time, children, this entire story, I would rather say it is an autobiography. This passage forms a part of the autobiography of Nelson Mandela titled Long Walk to Freedom. It is a saga of the glorious struggle that the blacks of South Africa waged against the apartheid regime to gain freedom. Now, children, as we have been doing, this is not the explanation of the chapter, this is the overview of the chapter. I would like to give more stress to the theme. Ultimately, the end of the day will mark what we have learned, how we can connect it to real life. Well, the lesson pays tribute to those black heroes and patriots who waged a relentless struggle against the apartheid or the racist regime of South Africa. Here we find a description of the inauguration ceremony held in the Union buildings, attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries. Now, as you see, what this chapter is going to convey. Children, before we start with the normal chapter, the overview of the chapter, let me tell you that after reading this chapter, you will find that it gives a message, a strong message indeed, of peace and unity of mankind. Nelson Mandela foresees a new regime which will be based on the equality of men and women. He hopes that in the new regime there will be no exploitation of man by man. There will be no room for racialism and segregation in the new order. Now, the chapter is quite lengthy, so we are going to cover it in a very simplified manner so that you find it interesting and you all are able to comprehend it well. Well, the very first part, when you will read, children, you will find, okay, the first part, first non-racial government, how it happened. How did it happen? It was the 10th of May 1994. The day was bright and clear. The inauguration ceremony of the first non-racial government was held at the lovely amphitheater in the Union buildings in Pretoria. I guess you will find that same in the glimpse. It was the largest gathering of international leaders on South African soil. Politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries attended the ceremony. First of all, Mr. De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo was sworn in as the first deputy president. Then came Mandela's turn. He was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. It was a history. After a long, long span, they got ultimate freedom from the whites. Now, children, what you need to note is, of course, the place which was, captivated with so many people. Dignitaries had come from so many countries. Second, the most important point to be noted down is Mandela's speech. Of course, it played a very significant role in changing the mindset of the people. You will find Mandela spoke for decades. Mandela spoke how, for decades, South Africa was the seat of white supremacy. The whites overruled them. Now, the presence of all people confer glory and hope, to newborn liberty. The blacks who were considered as outlaws not so long ago were hosting the nations of the world on their soil. But their victory over apartheid was a common victory for justice, peace, and human dignity. It was not only a fight for justice, it was also a fight for human dignity. Political freedom had been won. This is all, children, happened in the speech. Very, very important part. Political freedom had been won. Now they would work hard to liberate all their people from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, and disease. Never would South Africa again face the oppression of one by another. So this strong speech, created a sensation among the entire nation as well as in other countries. Then, as the speech was going on, impressive display of jets. Children, when you will read, you have to give a thorough reading. There was a spectacular display of jets. South African jets and helicopters roared in perfect, formation over them in the sky. It was also a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy and to the new government. Well, children, here something great happened. Two national anthems were played. You know, it could have. been like only the blacks anthem would have been, recited. But no, here Mandela actually tried to support the integrity of both, that is the whites as well as the blacks. Now, you see, children, as you will move further, the sense of history. Nelson Mandela, was overwhelmed with a sense of history. A few years after the Anglo-Boer War, apartheid was introduced in South Africa. The society based on, this color discrimination, racial discrimination, was the harshest and most human society in the world. Now, after this, freedom, a new system based on the equality of all men regardless of their color and race was replaced, the old and cruel system. So the chapter is going, very systematically, children. As you will get this video, you will very effectively you will find the same happening in the entire chapter. Next, the policy of apartheid, had created a deep and lasting wound in the people. Of course, we can also relate here the suffering when the British ruled our country. Even that was a very, a very deep, it also created a very deep and lasting impression in the minds of all Indians. The decades of exploitation and oppression of the black produced heroes, you will find those Tambo, Sislers, and many more. These black heroes were men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. They had to, sacrifice. The greatest wealth of South Africa, the greatest wealth of South Africa was not in its minerals and diamonds. This line, children, mark, was not in its minerals and diamonds, but in men of such great character. Of course, the country is known by its people, not by the minerals or any other thing. Next, very important topic, the struggle of comrades. You see, children, Nelson Mandela learned the meaning of courage from such brave comrades. Of course, they were, a source of inspiration. And, Mandela missed them very much on the day when he was elected as the president. Courage, is the victory over fear. Of course, sometimes we even watch the same, in advertisement. Advertisement, I mean, if you have watched the advertisement of Sprite, courage is the victory over fear. If you do not let your fear go, you can never come out victorious. These comrades were ready to risk and sacrifice their lives for an idea, and the idea was of freedom and equality. Even in the darkest prisons, their hopes and faith were not shattered or broken. So with that mindset, people were, there in South Africa, and that created a very great impact in Nelson Mandela's life. They never allowed the flame of struggle to be extinguished. It was a long, long battle, children. It was not a piece of cake. It was a long battle. Now you see, children, comes where Nelson Mandela focuses on twin responsibilities. When he was quite, young, he did not realize. Then it happened so that Nelson Mandela thought that every man has twin obligations. He has a duty towards his wife, children, and an obligation to his people and country. You see, children, until and unless one obligation is fulfilled, you cannot think of the other obligation. In South Africa, it was impossible for blacks like him to fulfill both those obligations. It was rather very, very difficult because the whites overruled them, never allowed them any sort of, freedom. If any black tried, at that point of time, if any black tried to live like a free human being, he was punished and isolated. He was forced to live an isolated life away from his family. He was forced to live a life of rebellion and secrecy. So this was the condition when South Africa had not gained independence. And you see, the chapter concludes where the formation of African National Congress, here we can relate to Indian National Congress. After independence, we even got a new formation. So Mandela now realized that the only way or you can say that not only was he, you know, deprived of freedom, but his brothers and sisters were also deprived of freedom. He could not resist that. That kept on, uh, creating a, a very sullen sort of impact in his heart and mind. And that was the reason why he joined the African National Congress. It was his desire for the freedom for his people and their self respect that totally transformed him from a weak young man to a bold one. This question may come, it has been marked as a very important question, that what, ignited him to form African National Congress. A law abiding lawyer was forced to become an outlaw. He realized that freedom is indivisible. There he realized, he knew the oppressed must be liberated. Children are oppressed and oppressor. What do we understand with that? Oppressed, when we talk about, it is again, being dominated by the oppressor. So when India had not got its independence, we were oppressed by the British. So the British can be considered as the oppressors. So the oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. Both of them must be liberated. So this concept he tried, to preach through this chapter. Well, children, now the most important question is that Nelson Mandela chapter is of course something related to history. Then how or why we are learning it in English literature? Well, you will find that after, closely reading the chapter, if you read the chapter very properly, you will find various outcomes you will yourself will be able to derive. The first thing, of course, children, after reading the entire chapter thoroughly, again my piece of advice to you, you will find something related about a great freedom fighter of South Africa. Of course, that is first. Second, mental grit and determination. If you have the power, if you are determined, nothing can change the course of life of a determined youth. Even a common man can play a big role. Now, at the same time, you will find that if there is a will, if there is a will, there is a way out. And the same happened. You see, like, we always feel like, a common man cannot do anything. But Nelson Mandela has proved it out of box. There is nothing that can defeat you if you so desire, children. So these learning outcome, children, just reading the chapter, no. I would suggest you try to derive learning outcome so that you can help the future and you can also understand your responsibility. Thank you, children. And more importantly, suggestion, you need to read the chapter and please do try to, correlate with your life and, with real life long activities. With this, I end. I hope you will like the explanation. Thank you. Till then, have a nice day.